The morning mist clung to the Cascade Mountains like a shroud as Ranger Station 47 received the emergency call. 3 hikers missing for 36 hours in some of the most treacherous terrain in Washington state. What should have been a routine search and rescue was about to become something none of them would ever forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen pulled his worn Honda Civic into the gravel parking lot of the ranger station, the engine making that familiar clicking sound that meant he'd need to visit Joe's garage again soon. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and that particular dampness that meant rain wasn't far off. He grabbed his thermos of black coffee from the passenger seat and checked his watch. 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early for his volunteer shift. The ranger station buzzed with unusual activity for this time of morning. Through the large windows, Marcus could see uniformed figures moving with purposeful urgency. Radios crackling, maps spread across tables. He'd been volunteering here for 3 months now, ever since moving to Cedar Falls, helping with trail maintenance and visitor education. It was simple work that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. "Morning, Marcus." Sarah Rodriguez, the lead ranger, barely glanced up from a topographical map as he entered. Her usually neat ponytail was already showing signs of stress, loose strands framing her tired face. "We've got a situation brewing. 3 college kids from Seattle went missing yesterday on the Whistler Peak Trail." Marcus nodded, setting his thermos down on the counter. The other rangers, Jake Morrison, Tom Bradley, and the newest addition, Kevin Liu, were clustered around the central table, their voices low but tense. Jake's weathered hands traced routes on the map while Tom adjusted his radio headset for the 5th time in 2 minutes. "The family called it in around midnight," Sarah continued, finally looking at Marcus. "Kids were supposed to check in yesterday evening. Never made it back to their campsite." "The weather's supposed to turn ugly by noon," Jake added without looking up. His 23 years with the Park Service showed in the way he read the topographical lines like scripture. "Temperature drop, visibility near 0 with the fog rolling in." Marcus moved closer to the map, studying the terrain. The Whistler Peak Trail wasn't technically advanced, but it had enough switchbacks and false summits to confuse inexperienced hikers. More concerning were the dozen smaller game trails that branched off the main path, easy to mistake for the correct route when visibility was poor. "Search and rescue from Spokane won't be here until 10, Tom said, frustration clear in his voice. The county stretched thin with that wildfire situation down south. Kevin, barely 6 months out of ranger training, looked between his senior colleagues with obvious anxiety. "So what do we do? Just wait?" "Hell no," Jake replied, rolling up his sleeves. "We know these mountains better than anyone coming from Spokane. We start a preliminary grid search, mark any signs, and establish communication checkpoints." Marcus watched the team dynamics unfold. Sarah's natural leadership, Jake's experience, Tom's technical expertise with communications, and Kevin's eager but nervous energy. It was a good team, but he could see the weight of responsibility settling on their shoulders. "I'd like to help," Marcus said quietly. The room fell silent for a moment. Jake looked up from the map, his expression skeptical. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't trail maintenance. This is serious search and rescue." "I understand that." Sarah exchanged a glance with Jake. "Marcus, you're great with the visitors, and you know the lower trails, but Whistler Peak is different. It's technical terrain, and if the weather turns—" "I've done some hiking," Marcus replied simply. Tom snorted softly. "Some hiking and search and rescue are completely different animals, buddy. These kids could be hypothermic by now. Injured, lost in terrain where one wrong step puts you over a cliff." Marcus nodded, accepting their dismissal with the same quiet demeanor he'd shown during his 3 months of volunteer work. They saw him as the helpful civilian who showed up reliably, cleaned trail markers, and answered tourists' questions about local wildlife. A nice enough guy who seemed to genuinely care about the outdoors, but hardly qualified for serious mountain rescue operations. "Tell you what," Sarah said, her tone gentle but firm, "you can help coordinate from here. Monitor communications, help plot search grids, maybe assist families when they arrive." It was a polite way of keeping him out of the field, and everyone knew it. Marcus simply nodded again. "Whatever helps." The Rangers began their preparations with practiced efficiency. Jake pulled climbing gear from storage lockers while Tom checked radio frequencies and GPS units. Kevin studied the map with intense concentration, probably running through his training scenarios. Sarah coordinated with the county dispatch, her voice calm and professional despite the underlying urgency. Marcus busied himself organizing the communication board, updating weather reports, and brewing a fresh pot of coffee. Through the window, he watched the morning light struggle against gathering clouds. The weather was definitely turning. "Marcus, could you call the visitor center and let them know we're closing the Whistler Peak trailhead?" Sarah asked while adjusting her pack straps. "Already done," he replied. "Also contacted the campground hosts at Pine Valley and Clearwater. If the kids try to make contact, they'll radio immediately." Sarah paused in her preparations, looking at him with mild surprise. Those weren't instructions she'd given him, but they were exactly the right steps to take. Good thinking. "Coffee's fresh," Marcus added. "Sandwiches are in the cooler if you're out there long." Jake shouldered his pack and walked toward the door. "We'll radio every 30 minutes, weather permitting. If search and rescue from Spokane arrives early, brief them on our grid pattern." "Will do." As the four rangers headed out into the gray morning, Marcus stood at the window watching their vehicles disappear into the forest. The station felt empty now, filled only with the static of radio chatter and the steady tick of the wall clock. He moved to the map table, studying the search grid Jake had outlined. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Emma in Portland. "How's the hermit life treating you? Mom's worried you're becoming too isolated up there." Marcus smiled slightly as he typed back, "Just helping out where I can. Talk soon." Emma didn't know about the nightmares that still woke him at 3 a.m., the way crowds made his chest tight, or how the simple routine of ranger station life was slowly helping him remember who he used to be before everything went wrong. She just knew her big brother had taken a break from his career and moved to a small mountain town where he knew nobody. The radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Jake. We're at Checkpoint Alpha. No sign of the missing hikers, but weather's deteriorating faster than forecast. Visibility dropping fast." Marcus keyed the microphone. "Copy, Jake. The weather service just updated. You've got maybe 90 minutes before it gets really ugly out there." "Roger that." "How are you reading the terrain analysis on grid section 4? Quote. Marcus looked at the map, noting the elevation changes and creek patterns. Steep approaches from the north and east. If they were trying to shortcut back to the main trail, they might have gotten funneled into the ravine system. There was a pause. "That's actually a good read, Marcus. We'll check that area next." For the next hour, Marcus coordinated communications, tracked the team's progress, and monitored weather updates. The missing hikers remained unfound, and conditions continued to worsen. When the radio finally crackled with Jake's voice again, the tension was unmistakable. "Base, we've got a problem. Kevin took a fall crossing Deadman's Creek. My ankle's twisted bad, maybe broken. We need to get him out. But visibility is near zero, and the temperature's dropping fast." Marcus felt something shift inside him, like tumblers falling into place in a lock he'd kept sealed for months. "What's your exact position?" "Grid 77, about 2 clicks northeast of Checkpoint Bravo." "Hold position. Don't attempt to move Kevin in these conditions." "Marcus, we can't just sit here. If we wait for the weather to clear." "Jake." Marcus's voice carried a quiet authority that seemed to surprise even him. "Trust me on this. Hold your position." The radio went silent. Outside, the first fat snowflakes began to fall. The silence on the radio stretched for 15 seconds before Jake's voice returned, confusion evident. "Marcus, what exactly are you suggesting we do? Kevin's in pain, temperature's dropping, and we've still got 3 missing hikers out there." Marcus studied the topographical map with new intensity, his finger tracing elevation lines and water features. Something was crystallizing in his mind, patterns he recognized, tactical considerations that seemed to flow naturally from years of training he'd never mentioned to anyone in Cedar Falls. "Give me your exact coordinates again," he said into the microphone. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We're at UTM coordinates 10TO6423745190847. Tom's voice crackled through the static. Marcus pulled out his own GPS unit, a military-grade device that looked far more sophisticated than the standard equipment the Rangers carried. Sarah would have questioned where a volunteer trail maintenance worker got such gear, but she wasn't here to see him power it up and input the coordinates with practiced efficiency. Jake, there's a shelter cabin about 800 meters northeast of your position. Forest Service emergency cache. It's not on your standard park maps. How do you know about that? Kevin's voice, tight with pain, came through the radio. Marcus hesitated. The cabin was marked on tactical maps, the kind distributed to specialized units for wilderness operations. It wasn't public knowledge. I've done extensive hiking in this area. While the Rangers debated their next move, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed David Chen, his younger brother, calling from his law office in Sacramento. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. David's voice was tense. There are people asking questions about you. What kind of people? Federal people. They showed up at my office yesterday asking about your current location, what you've been doing since you left the service. They were polite, but persistent. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd been careful, kept a low profile, and used his civilian credentials for everything. What did you tell them? The truth. That you moved to some small town in Washington to find yourself after your discharge. But Marcus, they knew things. About your unit. About operations that are supposed to be classified. The radio crackled again. Base, this is Sarah. We're hearing reports of another emergency. The helicopter went down about 15 miles west of here, near the state border. Pilot and 2 passengers. Situation unknown. Marcus's attention split between his brother's warning and the unfolding crisis. David, I need to call you back. Marcus, these people seem to think you might be involved in something. They asked specifically about your psychological state, whether you'd shown any signs of instability or unauthorized contact with foreign agents. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because you disappeared from everyone's life 6 months ago and won't tell your own family what really happened during your last deployment. The truth was, Marcus couldn't tell his family what happened because most of it was classified at levels that carried 20-year prison sentences. His last mission had gone sideways, in ways that intelligence committees would spend years investigating. Good people had died because of decisions made in Washington, and Marcus had been the one left holding the operational bag when the political winds shifted. David, I have to go. There's an emergency here. Marcus, wait. He ended the call and keyed the radio. Sarah, what's the status of the helicopter? Initial report came from a commercial pilot flying overhead. Small aircraft, possibly medical transport, went down in heavy weather. No radio contact since the crash. The scope of the crisis was expanding beyond what the small ranger team could handle. 3 missing hikers, an injured ranger, and now a helicopter crash with unknown casualties. The nearest search and rescue teams were still hours away, and weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Marcus made a decision that would have surprised his therapist, Dr. Patricia Holloway, who'd spent months trying to get him to re-engage with the world instead of hiding from it. He picked up the radio again. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. There are protocols for multi-casualty incidents in wilderness environments. You need to establish a command post, prioritize resources, and create coordination channels between different emergency teams. Marcus, I appreciate the input, but the helicopter crash takes priority. Trauma victims in aircraft accidents have a critical window for survival that's much shorter than exposure casualties. The missing hikers have shelter experience and gear. Kevin's injury is serious but not immediately life-threatening if he stays warm and stationary. Sarah's response took longer this time. How do you know about multi-casualty wilderness protocols? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know where you are. Time to come in from the cold. Agent Miller. Agent Miller. Marcus remembered the name from his debriefing sessions after the Somalia operation went wrong. Counterintelligence, the kind of people who asked uncomfortable questions about why certain classified intel had ended up in the wrong hands, and whether decorated soldiers might have been compromised during off-books missions. The ranger station's landline rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed Cedar Falls Police Department. Ranger Station 47, this is Marcus Chen. Mr. Chen, this is Chief Williams. I have some federal agents here asking about you. They'd like to have a conversation. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the careful civilian life he'd built over the past months beginning to crumble. What kind of conversation? The kind where it would be better if you came in voluntarily rather than having them come find you. Through the window, Marcus could see a black SUV pulling into the ranger station parking lot. Government plates, tinted windows. The the kind of vehicle that screamed federal law enforcement. A second SUV followed 30 seconds later. "Chief, there are multiple emergency situations unfolding here. People's lives are at stake." "I understand that, son, but these agents seem to think you might be involved in something that affects national security." The radio crackled with Jake's voice, urgent now. "Base, Kevin's getting worse. His core temperature is dropping and he's showing signs of confusion. We need to move him now, or risk serious hypothermia." Marcus watched two agents exit the first SUV, a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair, and a younger man who moved with military bearing. They approached the ranger station with purposeful strides, their breath visible in the cold air. "Chief, I need 20 minutes to coordinate these emergency responses. People could die if I walk away from this radio right now." 20 minutes, Marcus. Then these agents are coming to get you, and I won't be able to help you anymore. The call ended just as the federal agents reached the front door. Marcus could hear their voices through the thin walls, professional but insistent. They were asking the volunteer coordinator, Mrs. Patterson, about his schedule and habits. The radio squawked again. "Base, this is Tom. We've established communication with the helicopter crash site. 2 critically injured, 1 fatality. The pilot is conscious but trapped in the wreckage. They need immediate medical evacuation." Quote, Marcus stared at the radio, then at the map, then at the door, where federal agents were showing their credentials to Mrs. Patterson. The careful balance he'd maintained between his classified past and civilian present was collapsing in real time. His phone buzzed with another text from Agent Miller. "The Somalia intel leak investigation is still open. We have new evidence. Cooperation now could change everything." The mention of Somalia made Marcus's hands shake slightly. That operation had cost him 2 team members and nearly his sanity. The investigation afterward had suggested someone had fed their mission parameters to hostile forces, resulting in a perfectly executed ambush that should have been impossible. "Base, are you receiving?" Sarah's voice carried a note of desperation. "We need guidance on resource allocation. Do we split up to handle both emergencies, or concentrate on one?" Marcus looked at the map one more time, his military training warring with the need to protect the new identity he'd built. Outside, the snow was falling harder, and somewhere in these mountains, people were dying while federal agents closed in on secrets he'd thought were buried. He reached for the radio microphone, knowing that whatever he said next would determine not just the fate of the emergency victims, but his own future as well. The door to the ranger station opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sound of approaching footsteps. The debriefing room at the federal building in Seattle felt sterile and cold, but Agent Miller's demeanor had shifted dramatically from the hostile interrogation Marcus had expected. 3 days had passed since the mountain rescue operation, and the full scope of what had unfolded was still being processed by multiple agencies. "The Somalia intelligence leak has been traced to a compromised communication relay in Djibouti," Miller said, sliding a classified folder across the table. "Your unit's operational security was never breached from within. The ambush that killed Sergeants Morrison and Blake wasn't the result of betrayal by your team." Marcus felt something heavy lift from his chest, a weight he'd carried for 8 months, through sleepless nights and therapy sessions where he couldn't speak the truth about why he'd left the service. The investigation always suggested. The investigation was misdirected by faulty assumptions and political pressure to find a scapegoat, Miller interrupted. "Your psychological profile indicated guilt and withdrawal consistent with someone hiding classified information. We now know that guilt was survivor's syndrome, not betrayal." Through the window, Marcus could see the Seattle skyline shrouded in typical Pacific Northwest mist. Somewhere to the north, the Rangers at Station 47 were probably dealing with the aftermath of the most complex rescue operation in the station's history. "Agent Miller, the hikers and helicopter crash victims, how are they?" "All alive, thanks to your coordination. The pilot will walk again, though it'll take months of physical therapy. The 3 college students suffered mild exposure but no permanent damage. Ranger Lou's ankle required surgery, but he'll be back on duty by spring." Miller opened another file, this one thicker and marked with higher classification levels. "The Department of Homeland Security has been developing a new Wilderness Emergency Response Protocol, multi-agency coordination for incidents that cross jurisdictional boundaries and involve both civilian and military assets." Marcus studied the agent's expression, sensing an offer coming, and they need someone to head the program. Someone with both military tactical experience and civilian emergency management credentials. Someone who understands how to coordinate between agencies that don't always play well together. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. For months, he'd hidden from his military background, trying to build a simple civilian life. Now that same background was being offered as a path forward, not backward. The position would be based in the Pacific Northwest, Miller continued. You'd work with ranger stations, search and rescue teams, National Guard units, and federal agencies, developing protocols, training personnel, coordinating actual emergency responses. Marcus thought about Sarah's voice on the radio during the crisis, the way the team had ultimately trusted his judgment despite not understanding his background. He thought about Kevin's injury and how military medical training had helped him guide the Rangers through field treatment. Most of all, he thought about the satisfaction he'd felt using his skills to save lives rather than take them. There's one condition, Miller said. Full psychological clearance. The events in Somalia, your adjustment to civilian life, your ability to handle the stress of emergency coordination. Everything gets evaluated. By Dr. Holloway, quote, among others, but yes, she'd be part of the evaluation team. Marcus nodded slowly. Dr. Holloway had been pushing him for months to consider how his military experience might be channeled into constructive civilian work. She'd probably see this as a breakthrough. What about the Rangers at Station 47? They don't know about my background? That would be up to you. The position requires security clearance, but your cover identity as a civilian volunteer was legitimate. Marcus Chen, trail maintenance volunteer, was as real as Captain Marcus Chen, Special Operations. Agent Miller stood and moved to the window. There's something else. The helicopter that crashed was transporting medical supplies to a remote clinic. The pilot, James Morrison, is the nephew of one of the soldiers killed in your Somalia operation. Marcus felt the coincidence like a physical blow. Jake Morrison, the senior ranger, his nephew. Small world in the military community. James specifically requested to fly that medical supply run because he knew his uncle would have wanted to help people. The weight of interconnection, how the past and present were woven together in ways that couldn't be planned or predicted, settled over Marcus like a familiar burden that had somehow become lighter. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Rodriguez. Marcus, I don't know what happened during your meeting with those federal agents, but your job at the station is waiting when you're ready. We could use someone with your extensive hiking experience. A second text followed immediately. Also, Kevin wants to buy you dinner when he gets out of the hospital. Something about you knowing exactly how to stabilize his ankle. Miller smiled, reading over Marcus's shoulder. Word travels fast in small communities. They deserve to know the truth. Some of it, anyway. The operational details of Somalia remain classified, but your military service record and emergency management credentials are public information if you choose to share them. Marcus looked out at the Seattle skyline again, thinking about the mountains to the north where he'd spent the last 3 months learning to be a civilian. The irony was that in trying to escape his military identity, he'd discovered how to integrate it into something larger. When would the position start? After your psychological evaluation clears, which could take 30 to 60 days. In the meantime, you'd remain at Ranger Station 47 as a liaison while the new protocols are being developed. Marcus thought about Emma's concerns about his isolation, David's worries about federal agents, his parents' confusion about his career change. This position would let him be honest about his service without revealing the classified details that had nearly destroyed him. Agent Miller, I have one question. If this wilderness emergency program is so important, why approach me through an investigation? Why not just offer the position directly? Miller's expression grew serious. Because we needed to know if you could handle pressure without breaking protocol. The mountain rescue operation was essentially a field test. You coordinated multiple agencies, maintained operational security, and saved lives under extreme stress while federal agents were literally knocking on your door. You planned the timing? We accelerated our approach when we learned about the emergency, yes, but the emergencies themselves were real, and your response was entirely authentic. Marcus felt a mixture of admiration and irritation at the manipulation, but he understood the logic. High-level emergency coordination required people who could think clearly under pressure while maintaining discretion about sensitive information. I'll need to talk to Dr. Holloway before deciding. Of course. But Marcus, there's one more thing. The 3 college students you helped rescue? One of them is studying emergency management at the University of Washington. She's been asking about internship opportunities with wilderness emergency response teams. Marcus smiled, thinking about how crises sometimes reveal not just who people really were, but who they could become. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Dr. Holloway. Marcus, I've been contacted about a psychological evaluation for a potential federal position. I have to say I'm impressed that you're considering re-engaging with that part of your background. I think I'm ready to stop running from who I used to be. The question isn't who you used to be, Dr. Holloway replied. It's who you're becoming. Through the conference room window, Marcus could see helicopters in the distance, medical evacuation aircraft that might soon be part of the coordinated emergency response system he'd helped design. The mountains of his new home state stretched toward the horizon, holding countless hikers, climbers, and adventurers who might someday need the kind of help he was uniquely qualified to provide. Agent Miller was gathering his files, preparing to leave Marcus with the decision that would shape his future. Outside, the Seattle mist was beginning to clear, revealing glimpses of blue sky and distant peaks. Marcus thought about the radio call that had started everything. Jake's voice reporting Kevin's injury and asking for guidance. He'd responded instinctively, drawing on training and experience he'd tried to bury. But maybe burying wasn't the answer. Maybe integration was. Agent Miller, he said as the agent reached the door, when do we start the evaluation process? Miller paused, a slight smile crossing his professional demeanor. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Welcome back to service, Captain Chen. Even if it's a different kind of service. As the door closed behind the agent, Marcus remained at the window, looking north toward the mountains where Sarah, Jake, Tom, and Kevin were probably planning their next patrol routes. Soon, he'd be back among them, but this time as himself. All of himself, military and civilian, past and future, integrated into something new. His phone showed 17 missed messages from family, friends, and colleagues who'd heard pieces of the story. But the message that mattered most was a simple text from Jake Morrison. Marcus, whatever your story is, you're one of us now. That's all that matters. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the best way to find yourself wasn't to hide from who you'd been, but to discover how all the pieces of your life could fit together in service to something larger than yourself. The mountains were calling, and for the first time in months, Marcus Chen was ready to answer as exactly who he was. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself back at Ranger Station 47, but the dynamic had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The same topographical maps covered the walls. The same radio chatter filled the air, but the relationships had transformed completely. So let me get this straight, Kevin said, propping his cast leg on a chair while reviewing emergency protocols. You were special operations for 12 years, handled classified missions in places we're not supposed to talk about, and you spent 3 months here letting us explain basic trail safety to you? Quote. Marcus smiled while updating the communications board with new federal emergency frequencies. I learned a lot about civilian wilderness management. Military training doesn't cover everything. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she was reviewing the new multi-agency coordination protocols Marcus had helped draft. The humility is admirable, but next time there's an emergency, we're not treating you like a volunteer. Jake's already submitted paperwork to have you designated as our federal liaison. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Jake Morrison, whose nephew James was recovering well from the helicopter crash, had become Marcus's strongest advocate within the Park Service hierarchy. The family connection had created an unexpected bond that transcended professional relationships. Speaking of which, Tom said, adjusting a new piece of radio equipment that connected them directly to National Guard emergency response units, we got word that Seattle wants us to pilot a training program. Other ranger stations would send personnel here to learn the new protocols. Marcus nodded, reviewing the curriculum he'd been developing with Dr. Holloway's input. The psychological evaluation had gone better than expected, largely because his work at the ranger station had demonstrated healthy reintegration with civilian life. His therapist had noted that helping others in crisis had become a form of healing for his own trauma. The first training class starts next month, Marcus said. 12 rangers from stations across the Pacific Northwest, plus National Guard liaisons and emergency medical personnel. Kevin shifted his cast again, wincing slightly. Will you tell them about Somalia? It was a question that had come up repeatedly during Marcus's psychological evaluation. How much of his classified past could be shared for training purposes? The answer had surprised him with its simplicity. I'll tell them what they need to know to save lives, Marcus replied. The tactical principles translate to civilian rescue without revealing operational details. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. David told me about your new job. Mom's relieved you're using your military training for something positive. When can we visit your ranger station? The prospect of his family seeing this part of his life created a warmth Marcus hadn't felt in months. For too long, his civilian and military identities had existed in separate, incompatible worlds. Now they were merging into something integrated and purposeful. Actually, Sarah said, closing her laptop, there's something we need to discuss. The Department of Homeland Security wants to expand the program beyond wilderness emergency response. Marcus looked up from the communications board. How so? Urban disaster coordination, the same principles that worked during our mountain crisis. Multiple agencies, unclear jurisdiction, time-sensitive decisions under pressure, apply to terrorist attacks, natural disasters in populated areas, mass casualty events. The scope was larger than Marcus had anticipated, and he felt the familiar tension between opportunity and responsibility. His skills were valuable precisely because they'd been forged in the world's most dangerous places, but using them effectively meant accepting, rather than hiding from that background. They want me to relocate to Seattle? Eventually, yes, but the wilderness program would remain based here, with you splitting time between locations. You'd be developing protocols that could scale from a single missing hiker to a major earthquake response. Jake looked up from a maintenance checklist he'd been reviewing. What does that mean for the station? It means we become a training hub, Sarah replied. Permanent federal funding, expanded staff, state-of-the-art equipment. This place would become a model for wilderness emergency response nationwide. Marcus considered the implications. 6 months ago, he'd come to Cedar Falls seeking anonymity and simple work. Now he was being offered a position that would put him at the center of national emergency preparedness policy. There's one more thing, Sarah continued. The position comes with authority to recruit specialized personnel. If you know other veterans with relevant skills who are struggling with civilian reintegration. The suggestion hit Marcus deeply. He thought about former teammates who'd left the service and disappeared into civilian life, carrying their own versions of his trauma and guilt. The idea of creating pathways for them to use their skills constructively was appealing on multiple levels. His secure phone, a new device provided for his federal liaison role, rang with a call from Agent Miller. The conversation was brief but significant. Marcus, I've got an update on James Morrison's recovery. He wants to return to flying medical evacuation missions when he's cleared for duty. That's good news. There's more. He's requested assignment to the emergency response helicopter unit we're establishing here. Apparently, he wants to work with the team that saved his life. The circularity was almost overwhelming. The nephew of a soldier killed under Marcus's command would now be working directly with him on civilian rescue operations. It felt like closure and a new beginning simultaneously. Agent Miller, how does this work with my security clearance? The new position involves both classified protocols and public emergency response. Compartmentalization. Your military background provides credibility and tactical expertise without requiring disclosure of specific operational details. Think of it as translating skills rather than revealing secrets. After ending the call, Marcus found himself surrounded by his ranger colleagues, all of whom had become something like family over the past few months. The bonds forged during the crisis had created relationships that transcended typical workplace dynamics. So, Kevin said, grinning despite his injury, are you going to accept the expanded position? Marcus looked around the room, at the maps that had become familiar, at the equipment that had evolved from simple ranger tools to sophisticated emergency coordination systems, at the people who'd trusted him before they knew his full story. I think I am, he replied, but only if I can maintain my volunteer shifts here on weekends. Sarah laughed. Marcus, you'll be a federal emergency response coordinator. I don't think you'll be doing trail maintenance anymore. Maybe not trail maintenance, Marcus said, but this is where I learned how to be a civilian again. I'm not walking away from that. Tom nodded approvingly. Besides, who else knows where all the unmarked emergency shelters are? The reference to Marcus's mysterious knowledge of classified cabin locations had become a running joke, but it highlighted the reality that his unique background would always be part of his value to the team. As evening approached, Marcus found himself alone in the ranger station, reviewing the personnel files for the upcoming training program. Among the applications was one that caught his attention. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, recently discharged from Army Special Forces, seeking civilian emergency management experience. He recognized the pattern in her file: decorated combat veteran, exemplary service record, abrupt departure from military life with minimal explanation. It was his own story reflected in someone else's personnel jacket. Marcus reached for his phone and dialed the number listed on her application. The conversation that followed would be the first of many, as he began building a network of veterans whose skills could be channeled into civilian emergency response. Sergeant Santos, this is Marcus Chen with the Pacific Northwest Emergency Response Coordination Program. I'd like to discuss an opportunity that might interest you. Outside the ranger station windows, the mountains stood silhouetted against a clear evening sky. Somewhere among those peaks, other hikers were setting up camp. Other emergencies were waiting to unfold. Other opportunities for service and redemption were taking shape. Marcus had learned that hiding from the past wasn't healing. Integration was. The soldier he'd been and the civilian he was becoming weren't separate identities competing for dominance, but complementary aspects of a larger purpose that was still revealing itself. The radio crackled with routine evening check-ins from various patrol units, a sound that had become as comforting as any lullaby. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trainees, new chances to transform military skills into civilian service. For the first time since Somalia, Marcus Chen was genuinely excited about the future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.